In any team coaching environment, friction is inevitable. Participants splinter into side conversations, scroll through their phones during critical discussions, or directly challenge the authority of the person leading the room. When a novice coach encounters this friction, the instinctual reaction is defensive. They perceive the disengagement as a personal attack or a direct symptom of their own failing authority. An expert coach approaches the room with a different baseline. They understand that systemic pushback is not an anomaly. It is a predictable, mechanical feature of group dynamics. Rather than trying to eradicate this resistance, the expert views the disruption as a stress test. It is a functional gift from the group to the facilitator. This network model visualizes the stress test. As disruptive energy pulses, represented by these red waves, the team tests the central coach node. By absorbing the resistance instead of breaking under pressure, the coach converts that energy into a stable bandwidth of trust, reinforcing the entire network. Surviving this test does not rely on improvisational talent or natural charisma. It requires the strict application of a predefined operational protocol. That protocol is built on 3 pillars. The first is preventative alignment. The second is internal baseline stabilization. And third, systemic execution. By relying on this tripartite framework instead of ego, a facilitator can take raw team resistance and convert it into systemic stability. This structural schematic maps the 3 pillars. The foundational layer is preventative alignment, built entirely through contracting and intention. Managing a live disruption begins long before the session starts, as these interlocking agreements form a gapless foundation. The first step is establishing explicit operational rules. The facilitator must ask the group directly exactly how they intend to work together in the room. This means setting precise terms for logistical distractions. The coach clearly predefines the exact breakpoints when participants can check emails and use their devices. Defining these parameters up front eliminates behavioral ambiguity. It strips away the easy excuses for incidental distraction later in the session. With the logistical rules set, the foundation requires a psychological anchor. The facilitator extracts a verbal commitment from the room regarding the actual value of the meeting. The coach challenges team members individually on their specific intention. By asking them directly why their time investment matters today, the coach forces the participants to justify their own presence. This strong initial contracting builds structural safety. It shifts the burden of focus away from the coach having to police the room and places it squarely on the team's own stated agreements. With the foundation set, we move to the middle structural layer. This is the coach's internal baseline, represented by the principle of unshakable presence. When a direct challenge hits the room, the primary point of failure for the facilitator is physiological derailment. The physical symptoms are immediate. The coach begins to sweat, shifts into a defensive posture, or abruptly changes their vocal tone. If that internal baseline destabilizes, tactical interventions will fail. The team immediately senses that the coach has taken the challenge personally. To prevent this collapse, the facilitator requires strict, non-negotiable pre-session routines designed to lock in absolute cognitive sharpness. This starts with cognitive isolation. The coach mandates a hard disconnect from all external tasks and emails exactly 15 minutes prior to stepping into the room. Next, they deploy very specific sensory triggers. Listening to a targeted audio track or using a distinct olfactory cue consistently anchors the brain into its optimal performance state. Finally, the coach always establishes spatial anchoring. By physically pre-familiarizing themselves with the layout of the room, they establish territorial comfort before the team even arrives. These routines lock in the required mental state. The coach approaches the group strictly as a dynamic system to be managed, never as an opposing force to be fought. This physiological regulation acts as a highly effective internal shield. It prevents structural challenges from the team from ever triggering the coach's own personal insecurities. The final, visible layer of the framework rests on top of this stable presence. These are the active, in-the-moment tactics. Consider a scenario of acute systemic disengagement. The facilitator is delivering a vital point, but the entire team is quietly typing away on their laptops. A novice makes one of 2 errors here. They either demand authoritative compliance or they passively ignore the behavior and hope it stops. The correct systemic intervention is the mirroring protocol. Notice how the stable structural model reflects the incoming disruptive energy straight back to its source. Mechanically, the coach firmly halts the session. They take the observed reality of the room and neutrally reflect it back to the group, completely devoid of accusation. The exact phrasing is critical. The coach states the observation, "I see everyone is on their computers." Then they deliver a neutral query. "How do you feel about what is happening right now?" The psychological impact of this reflection is immediate. It induces a momentary shock and forces intense self-awareness upon the group. Mirroring deliberately strips the coach of the disciplinarian role. It forces the systemic entity itself, or a designated team leader, to assume accountability and self-correct the behavior. Sometimes the disruption isn't systemic disengagement, but an isolated, direct challenge. This often manifests as biting irony or overt prejudice directed at the coach from a single individual. This triggers the troll fallacy. The visual maps the danger. The central coach node pauses the group process to engage exclusively with the single detractor to win the argument. As the coach locks into this binary one-on-one exchange, the rest of the group is abandoned. The broader session collapses. The correct protocol requires absorbing the hit and immediately pivoting. Watch as the central node receives the isolated attack, but instantly redistributes a stabilizing query outward to the entire network. The coach delivers a brief, disarming response to the individual and then asks the room, "What does this mean for the team?" Beyond verbal redirection, the coach utilizes spatial dynamics to modulate the energy of the room without ever initiating direct conflict. Simply standing up and changing position within a U-shaped seating arrangement alters the physical power dynamic and recenters the room's attention. Furthermore, utilizing calculated, self-deprecating humor and displaying genuine vulnerability actively drops the systemic defenses of the entire group. True authority in a room is maintained strictly by manipulating spatial energy and group focus. It is never won by engaging in isolated combat. This brings us back to the complete architecture. The methodology relies entirely on foundational contracting, the internal baseline presence, and systemic mirroring tactics. The ultimate defense against team disruption is never a quick, clever response. It is the precise alignment of these three distinct operational layers. When these layers compress and align perfectly, they form the structural integrity of the coach. This integrity is proven exclusively under live fire. It is validated when a coach enforces their preset boundaries, maintains emotional control, and reflects accountability back onto the group. We return to the core operational reality. Disruption is a natural, mechanical feature of human systems. It is an element to manage, not an enemy to destroy. Facilitators who master this architecture transform disruption into a catalyst for team self-regulation.